Welcome to the Business Bravery podcast, inspiring stories from coaches and course creators to help you do the next brave thing in your business. Coming up on the Business Bravery podcast.
Just right there, like me speaking in front of people, even me being here on your podcast today is just like such a brave thing, because in high school, middle school, when I was younger, I was always the shy kid at the back of the class, right? Like I never wanted to be called on because I was always afraid of like whatever. So then in 2020, I pivoted to do coaching online, and I knew I would have to like step in front of more people, which was also terrifying, right? Like it was terrifying on a whole nother level. And I was like, oh, I have to actually like talk about like me and like some of my feelings and some of the things that I've done. And is anyone going to want to hear about that? At January 1, I had no plans of starting a podcast. January 2, I was on a networking meeting and they said, name one big, hairy thing you're going to do this year. And I got to me and I was like, I'm going to start a podcast. And so many people were like, really? How can I be on there? How can I support you? And I was like, oh, it felt amazing and awful, right? Like amazing because I was like, oh my gosh, here it is. I'm doing it. I'm doing this thing. And not awful as in like terrible, but awful as in like, oh my gosh, what if nobody listens? What if nobody wants to hear this? Yes. Really closely followed by like, what did I just say? How you talk about yourself or talk to yourself, like that matters. And like, if you're always telling yourself, oh man, you did that dumb thing again, or blah, 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 right? That feels really heavy. But, you know, if you approach it as like, okay, this isn't working. Let's do something to change how I'm doing this thing, right? Whatever that thing is. How can I reapproach that thing so it doesn't feel so hard?
I'm your host, Tiffany Gilliland, an Australian business and launch coach with 10 years experience in online marketing. I'm also the creator of the Brave Launch Framework. I help coaches to be brave so they can make more impact and get more clients. From speaking on camera to selling to launching, my approach to bravery helps you take bigger leaps without the mental breakdowns. It's the secret ingredient to bigger results. Today, I'm talking to Maggie from Maggie Lynn Coaching, an amazing coach who specializes in taking new entrepreneurs from chaos to clarity. She has 15 years experience across multiple successful businesses, moving from photography through to thriving yoga studio and now into coaching. Maggie shares her transformation from shy kid at school through to commanding rooms as a yoga teacher and now being on podcasts and running her own podcast too. Along the way, we discuss fear of public speaking, learning to trust her gut to make big decisions, leaving corporate, and managing your mind through it all. She also discusses her unique approach to CEO mindset, employee mindset, and the goddess mindset, which is an amazing approach to managing a business and your mind. Stay tuned for a fascinating discussion as we discover stories of Maggie's business bravery, past, present, and future. Now, who's ready for some business bravery inspiration? Let's dive in. Alrighty, hi everyone. I am here this week with the amazing Maggie Olson, who I've been following for quite a while on Instagram and have been diving into all of her amazing stuff. And I can't wait to discover all of her stories of bravery, past, present, and future plans, future bravery plans. So yeah, going to dive in. Alrighty. So, Maggie, tell us, what brave things are you doing in your business right now? And tell us all a little bit about your business in your own words.
So, what brave things am I doing? I feel like this year has really been just kind of uncharted territory for me. I've really set aside some of the things that I've kind of held on to, like a lot of photography things, a lot of yoga things. And for a little backstory, so I am a serial entrepreneur. I started my photography business in 2007, and I started that because I lived in Spain for 6 months. I studied there when I was in college, and I took tons of photos over there, but I specifically remember taking one photo, and I remember thinking, this is it, I have to be a photographer. So I came home and I told my mom, I was like, yeah, I'm gonna have a photography business. And she was like, okay, great, finish college first, right? I was like, oh yeah, okay, cool, got it, right? So I took a couple photography classes, graduated, and luckily I had a corporate job. I guess luckily I had a corporate job lined up, right? So I stepped into that, And then I started building my photography brand and I was able to grow that. And then in like 2012 or 2013, I left that corporate job to go full time, all in on myself for photography. And I was like, yes, this is it. This is going to be the thing. And then I found yoga. And that's great. So I wound up kind of combining those two things. And I did a lot of photography for yoga studios. And then I wound up getting trained to teach yoga. So just right there, like me speaking in front of people, even me being here on your podcast today is just like such a brave thing, because in high school, middle school, when I was younger, I was always the shy kid at the back of the class, right? Like I never wanted to be called on because I was always afraid of like whatever, right? Just anything, like people looking at me. Oh my gosh, right? So, just the fact that I've totally 180 to being like, I can't wait to be on podcasts. I have my own podcast, right? Like I'm on camera on Instagram and all that stuff. Like that's just such a completely different like perspective. And I love that I was able to step into that. So over the years, right? Like yoga really helped me come out of that shell, that kind of like scared to say anything shell. And learning to teach yoga, learning to speak in front of an audience really helped elevate my photography brand in a way that I was not expecting. So I photographed a lot of weddings for quite a few years. And when I started teaching yoga, I noticed almost right away that I was able to kind of like command a room and like stand in front of these people and say, okay, we're going to take these wedding photos and I'm going to make it as fun as possible. And we're going to do it as quick as possible. So if you look at me and you smile and you do what I say, we're going to get done with this faster. Right. So it just gave me that like next level up. And then in 2020, when all of the crazy pandemic stuff was happening, I found myself faced with another decision. Do I stay with the yoga studio? Because I was teaching yoga. I owned a studio. I had employees, right? So I had all these people that were under me and I was like, do I stay doing this? It's not truly bringing me joy. And I didn't really realize that until I came home from Bali and I was like, oh, I do not want to deal with this. I don't want to deal with everybody's stuff in the way that I was having to deal with it, right? Like I love coaching because I get to help people deal with their stuff, but I didn't love managing a studio because I was like, I don't want to deal with that kind of stuff, right? Like it was so difficult to face some of those opinions, fears, right? That were coming up for not just me, for everyone, right? So I was like, you know what? Here is an opportunity for me to pivot again and let's see what happens. So then in 2020, I pivoted to do coaching online and I knew I would have to like step in front of more people, which was also terrifying, right? Like it was terrifying on a whole nother level. And I was like, oh, I have to actually like talk about like me and like some of my feelings and some of the things that I've done. And is anyone going to want to hear about that? Right? Does anyone really think I'm funny, or does anyone, and it brought back all that stuff from like high school and middle school where it was like, I think I'm just going to sit back at the back of the class, whereas now I'm like, I had another shift during that, right? I challenged myself to do 30 reels in 30 days. So it was like face in front of the camera every single day. And that again leveled up my like being brave, stepping in front of my own camera and showing up to whoever wanted to see me, right? Whoever I was starting to attract. So as far as what's brave in my business, I would say taking on podcasting is definitely something brave that I've stepped into. I've always wanted to do it. And a lot of people always said to me, it's so hard, you're not going to like it. And I'm like, finally, earlier this year, I was like, but what if I do like it? What if I do? And I love it, right? Like I love creating podcasts. I love being on other people's podcasts. So I'm like, okay, this is something that I want to bring more to the forefront in my business, right? So pulling out those things that I'm like, okay, I'm a coach. I help women, and I want to help women pull those things that they really love to the front of their business. I think podcasting is probably the bravest thing that I've done this year. I'm sure my husband would probably tell me a whole bunch of other things, but as far as like taking on a new project and not really knowing what in the world I was doing, right? I had no clue. At January 1, I had no plans of starting a podcast. January 2, I was on a networking meeting and they said, name one big, hairy thing you're going to do this year. And I got to me and I was like, I'm going to start a podcast. And so many people were like, really? How can I be on there? How can I support you? And I was like, oh. Okay. All right. Well, here's the universe on a silver platter handing me, right? Like handing me exactly what I wanted. And I was like, well, okay, here it goes. I don't know what I'm doing, but let's connect in the DMs, right? So yeah, it's been just such a fun thing to take on in my business.
I definitely feel that because like you, I've started my podcast this year and it's been a dream of mine for years. Like I knew what it was going to be called and everything. And for me, I always thought I had to get to a certain income level before I could do that because it takes so much time and,
Right.
all the work and everybody tells you, oh yeah, podcast, there's so much work. You need a team, you need people and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, I mean, like even for me, like I have a background in video editing like you. I have photography, video, and yeah, doing that kind of stuff. So that side of things not as hard. The actual getting on, talking to people, the interpersonal skills, that's what I'm building at the moment. So yeah. Because yeah, like you, at school, I didn't want to be called on. I just, an awesome day was if nobody noticed me. Like all of my school report cards were, she works hard and she's conscientious. Like every year, each teacher said the same thing because they didn't know me, right?
Right. Yes.
So
is a pleasure to have in class. That's what mine always said. Is a pleasure to have in class. And I'm like, well, that's great because I don't really talk much.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, I definitely feel the bravery of doing the podcast and that kind of thing. So, yeah, how did it feel when you were like recording your first podcast episode? Like,
it felt amazing and awful, right? Like amazing because I was like, oh my gosh, here it is. I'm doing it. I'm doing this thing. And not awful as in like terrible, but awful as in like, oh my gosh, what if nobody listens? What if nobody wants to hear this? But then I also had the thought of like, well, that's okay. It'll give me stepping stones, right? So if someone's going to go way back, right? Like in a year from now, they're going to go all the way back to episode 1. Like, well, I don't know. I'm just not going to worry about it, right? So it was one of those things like I had no clue how to record. Well, I knew how to record on Zoom, right? So that's where I started. And for me, my solo podcasts, I've now transitioned into using GarageBand. So I taught myself how to edit audio in GarageBand. That was something that I had no clue how to do. So I created episode 1 on Zoom and then used the audio. And I was like, well, how do I get an intro? How do I have music? Right. And I'm like, man, there's all these things that I had no clue I had to do. Right. So then I had to go and like search how to find all that stuff. And I mean, really, it was so good because it was something that like I needed as a refresh and kind of like a reset in my business to like bring new energy and like breathe new life into my business is like, oh, wow, I get to be a beginner again and like start over kind of with something that I've never done before and a new challenge to like connect with a new potential audience.
Yeah, I guess because I mean, you've been in business since 2007. You've built multiple different businesses, so you must be very comfortable with being a beginner again. Like, do you enjoy that feeling? Do you seem to seek it out more or?
Yeah, I would say yes, I do. And I actually help a lot of women entrepreneurs who are at that starting point where they're like, well, I have this like side hustle, this like side business thing, and now I want to take it full time, but I'm not really quite sure how to get from like part-time-ish to like full-time-ish without having all of the like noise and chaos that comes with moving from like, oh, it's just a kind of a hobby to like, no, this is my business. So I try to spend a lot of time in that like beginner mentality, right? Like how if I was a beginner again, how would I maybe do this thing different? Or how would I reinvent the wheel? Or even how can I take things that I've done and explain it to like my 5-year-old, right? To say, here is the breakdown of how to run a podcast if you were 5, right? And I have a 5-year-old and a 1.5-year-old. So part of it is probably because I live in a right, my kids are always like that state of wonderment, that childlike play, that learning, right? There's so much there that as an entrepreneur, even 16 years in, like being in an entrepreneur position, right? Like 16 years in, and I'm still trying to find new ways to like keep things like fun and exciting and not let it get like stale and stagnant, because I think there's a point in business where you get into things and it's this kind of the similar schedule day in and day out, and it starts to all of a sudden get mundane, and it's like, well, this is kind of boring. This isn't what I signed up for, right? You hit those like lulls or plateaus in your business, and it's like, oh, I need something else to like jazz things up a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. It can get stale. Like, it's so funny. It's been really interesting talking to all these people about bravery because, like you said earlier, it's like, oh, here's what I can think of that's brave at the moment. I'm sure there's other things and there's other things other people would find brave, but I'm just so used to doing this stuff now that I don't even think about it. And that's sort of what I find fascinating. But then as we go up the levels in business, there'll always be new brave things, you know, hiring a team. When we get up to those levels, it could be finding a CEO for the business and getting to take a step back. Like, there's all these levels of bravery and new things to do. Yeah, it's just sort of interesting how we get used to being brave, but then there's always still new brave things to do, even though it's not like it's situational, isn't it? It's not a skill that you master. Yeah, sorry, just coming to that now.
No, for sure. And one of my previous coaches said, the problems you have when you're just starting out, you also have some of those problems when you're 6, 7, 8 figures, right? It's just maybe a little bit bigger or maybe a little smaller, depending on where you're at, right? Like, those problems still exist. You still have to learn those new things and do those, right? Like bringing on a team, for example, that is something that I am not sure that I want, but I've explored that, right? Like, what could that look like? And like knowing I'm going to have to explain my like daily ins and outs to someone at some point. If that happens, like that is a little overwhelming, because I can be all over the place, right? Because I'm the one running the show. I'm driving the bus and I'm like, conducting the orchestra on the bus. I'm doing all the things, and I'm like, it would be really nice to have someone to do these things, but can they do them the way I want them done, right? Like, can I write an operating procedure where they will understand what I want, right? So like, being confident in my CEO skills, or I like to call them CEO and employee mindsets. Like, am I confident enough to say, yes, I trust you with this. Here's how I do it. Let me know how you do it, right? Like, being able to hand that off and not be like, did you do it yet? Are you done yet? Did you do it the exact way that I said? Are you sure right? Like, and not micromanage that.
Oh man, yeah, I definitely get that. I mean, for me, for some things, like, I have no problem handing them off to. I just, yep, you do your thing. I'm happy. I'm not good. I mean, I do write standard operating procedures, but I prefer to record videos of me doing stuff. That way I can talk through my thought process while I'm doing it and capture some of that. So it makes it easier for me. So here, you watch me do it while I record a video, and here's why I'm doing this, which is harder to capture in a standard operating procedure, I think. But yeah, then there's other things, like when it comes to copywriting and stuff, because that's where I started out in online business, was writing and doing social media stuff. That's one of the hardest things I find, to find someone else to help me with. I just, I get way too possessive, and no, that's not what I would say. And yeah, no, it'll probably be different at some point, But yeah, last time I tried that to free up time, it was, yeah, it didn't go well. But yeah, when it comes to the graphics and things and scheduling, social media scheduling, I'm like, I don't need to micromanage that. You can schedule away, my friend. So yeah.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, I know there are things like I know there are things that I will be the same way about, right? Where I'm like, well, I could probably do this better and faster. So why don't I just take it on? And that there are other things that I've handed off a few things to a VA and I'm like, you know what? This is just, it takes me forever to do it because I don't want to do it, right? I don't like doing it. So you do it and I don't care how you do it. This is what I want and here's when I want it done by. So when it's done, let me know.
Man, actually, just when you said that whole, it takes me way too long to do it and getting somebody in and it takes them no time at all. For me, that was my bookkeeper. That was the first person that I hired. And that was someone like, see, my father was an accountant and he was very big. Have to know your numbers, and I had always planned to go into business, so I paid enough attention to the numbers part to get that part so I could manage a business, right? So yeah, and then it was just like I spent 7 hours pulling my hair out. Do I put it as this account? Do I put it as that account? I can't remember. My dad passed away a number of years ago, so I can't just phone him, and so
Right.
and then I'm just like, you know what? I'm gonna hire someone. She spends an hour. Took me 7 hours trying to work out, do I have this account, that account, and all this kind of stuff, like in the chart of accounts and stuff. And this is stuff I should know. My dad's probably rolling over in his grave going, but you know what? It's worth it. Like it saves me so much stress and heartache. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. One of my mentors, he said that if you are doing a task and it's taking you forever, figure out what your hourly rate is that you charge, right? So if you charge $100 an hour and it's taking you 7 hours, that's potentially $700, right? So if you can hire someone to do it for less than $700, it's a win, right? It'll save you time and money. Yeah. And when he said that to me, I was like, oh, wow. Okay. That makes so much sense to me, right? Like I don't have to suffer doing these things when, like I can free up my time to do what I'm best at. And then I can hand stuff off to someone who is best at that task for, sometimes a fraction of the price, depending on what it is. So that was one of those pieces of information that I was like, oh, wow. Thank you. That just gave me so much permission to shift and grow, right? And do the brave thing of bringing on a VA, right? And like understanding like it's okay to ask for help, and chances are people are willing to do it and can do it usually 2 or 3 times faster than me, depending on what it is I'm doing.
Oh man, eye-opening stuff. and kind of brave to admit that like for me at least, it was really brave to admit that it's like, hey, this should be my strength, but it's not my strength. This is somebody else's strength. This is something that I'm not good at. It's like that's actually kind of brave in and of itself. So yeah.
Yeah. And I think, like when you think about that you grew up with accounting, right, in your family. I think that's handy to know, right? Especially when you're starting out, because when you're starting out, you have a grasp on like what it is those numbers are or can be. And it might be easier for you to articulate that to a bookkeeper to say, hey, like it just takes me too long. And you're better at it, right? I connect with a lot of women who have no clue about their numbers in business. And that is something that I help a lot of women with, is to understand their numbers and understand what some of those minimum costs can be, what, like pricing an offer. If I'm working with a coach or a creator, right? Pricing their offer in a way that will cover the bills and make them money, right? Like that's a skill that I don't think many people have a firm grasp on when they step into business.
Yeah, definitely. I just was like, I know you gave us the background on your sort of trajectory, but I wanted to just go back and sort of connect with some of the brave steps you took. Like, what was some of the brave stuff, if you can remember, when you started your photography business, it being your first business, and what were some of the brave steps or things that you had to face in at that stage? I'm sure a lot of your clients are in that similar stage, right? Like,
yeah. Oh, for sure. So I think, like the first brave thing that I probably did was telling my parents, my mom and my dad, like, hey, I'm going to be a photographer, right? Like choosing that. And even though I was going to school at the time, I was at university to be a teacher, and like I wanted to be a Spanish teacher. And when I came home, I was like, hey, actually, I want to do this thing. And I was really scared to tell them because I was really scared they were going to be like, no, you have to like when you're going to school, you're going to like get the job that you're studying for. And they were both like, yeah, totally cool. Like, please finish school so that like maybe you can get a job and grow that business, right? Because if you start out with nothing, like be nice to have like a little nest egg, right? As you're in corporate and so on. And I was like, oh, yeah. Okay, right. So I did that, and my corporate job, I worked in technical documentation and writing. So I got to be the photographer for that company. And I got to take video, do photos. They let me do editing. So I learned a lot at that job. So after telling my parents, I worked there I think I worked at that job for 7 or 8 years. And it got to the point where I was so busy with photos that I was working like 40 hours a week at my job. And then I was working like 20 to 30 hours a week doing photo stuff. And it got to the point where I was like, I can't do this anymore, right? Something has to give, and I don't want it to be the photos, right? So I approached my boss and I said, hey, can I work like 30 hours a week? Can I go to part-time? Because I was hourly and like I really didn't have enough work to do, but I don't know, I guess they wanted me there full time. So like there was a lot of time where I sat doing nothing because I'm like, I don't have anything else to do. No one else has stuff for me to work on. And my boss actually told me, no, you're going to need to work overtime because everyone else is working overtime in the department. So it looks bad if you're going to part-time. And I was like, okay, no, then I quit. Like I was not planning to quit the day that I quit. It was one of those things where I got to work and I was like, you know what? I don't want to work overtime here. I'm going to quit. And like called a meeting with my boss and the HR person, and they walked in the room. It was almost Christmas. They walked in the room and they were like, what's happening? And again, I was a very like shy person. So like the fact that I called like managers into a room, like my palms are sweating just thinking about it. Right? Like, okay, like stood up in front of them, took a big breath, and I just said, I quit. And the look of shock on their faces, it's something I'll never forget, right? One of the managers said to me, he started clapping and he was like, congratulations. Are you going all in on your photo business? And I was like, yeah. He's like, you're going to do amazing things. I am so proud of you. And I was like, wow. That's so awesome, right? My boss was like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? You do a lot of work. You can't quit. And I was like, no, I'm done. Do you want me to leave right now? Because I will leave right now. Like, that's how done I was with that job. And so I finished out my 2 weeks, and I don't know. I guess they replaced me with 4 people after I left. So like, yeah, I did do a lot there.
Oh man. So how did that feel in that moment when you said, I quit?
It felt amazing and awful, right? The words came out of my mouth and I was like, yes, really closely followed by like, what did I just say? What did I just say? Was that really what I wanted to do? And then I was like, yeah, you know what? I'm choosing me. I'm not choosing to stay in a place that doesn't appreciate what I'm doing, right? Like I don't have the opportunities, and if I wouldn't have left, I would still be in that same position. I wouldn't be doing what I love, right? I wouldn't be I wouldn't be having this conversation probably with you, right? Like I wouldn't have been able to like step into my, I guess, like authority, right? Or step into my like personality more. So, you know, like I'm so thankful I took that brave step and I like just stood up, did it, and I didn't let my brain talk me out of it, right? Like I'm really good at like talking myself out of things because, you know, my brain is always like, oh, but what if that's a bad idea? You had that thought, but maybe it's a bad idea. And it was similar with my podcast, right? I held off because I was like, oh, people say it's hard. It's a lot of work, blah, blah, blah. And then I started doing it and I'm like, this is not that much. It's not that much more work than I was already doing, right? And it wasn't that difficult for me to learn the things that I needed to learn. So like looking back, I'm like, I could have started this earlier, but I'm glad I started it when I did, right? Because I don't think I would have had the outreach that I had to get people on there. So same thing with my corporate job. When I left there, I wasn't ready until I was ready. And like my gut basically knew I was ready to move on and like helped give me that nudge of like, yep, it's time. Here's what you got to say. Don't back down.
Oh man, yeah, that's awesome. I know, like I went full time in my business about 2 years ago now. And yeah, even though like I'd been running this business on the side for a number of years, you know, before I did it. And yeah, I just remember that feeling of now's the time. Like for me, it was like, if I don't do it now, I'm never going to do it. Because for me, it wasn't a case like my job was amazing, right? I had complete flexibility. My boss would let me do what I needed to. He'd stay out of my way, let me do what I needed to. Yeah, like that's his management style was like what they call laissez-faire management style. And yeah, I was like, oh hey, this isn't a bad fit for me. And you know, I had the flexibility as long as I, you know, did my work, met my deadlines and all that stuff. So you know, some people when they're trying to move into their business full time, they're railing against this job that is terrible or horrible and it's sucking the life out of them. But mine, it was the dream job, you know, the job that shouldn't exist, right? Like yeah. I mean, obviously it wasn't all perfect, you know, there were co-workers, there was office politics and things, but it was very minimal and yeah, not too bad.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah. But it does mean like it was a big decision to like give up the safety and the security for me at least. Yeah.
Right. Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And I know I definitely had that right after I said I quit, I was like, oh, now I really have to go all in on continuing to make money for myself, right? Because now I wasn't guaranteed that paycheck every 2 weeks, right? So now I was like, I'm in charge of making my own money. And, you know, not that I wasn't before, but like having the security of a job that was gone. And there was a lot of things that I had to figure out, right? I had to figure out health insurance. I had to figure out how to continue to bring in clients, right? And as a wedding photographer at the time, there's high and there's low, right? Like the summertime, you're booked solid. And then at least here where I am, right? In the winter from December to April, I mean, there's snow on the ground here then. So there's not a lot of photo activity. So I was like, okay, I have to like make sure that I understand my like booking demands. And that really forced me to take a look at my prices, right? My offers and like how I was connecting with people, what projects I was taking on, what weddings I was photographing, right? Like different events, things like that. That really taught me a lot about how to be sustainable in that business, was like making sure my offers were priced in a way that made me money, right? And really like met my hourly quote unquote wage value.
But it's more than just the wage value. Like at least in a photography business, like you've got to pay for all the equipment and the upgrading of the equipment. Like there's there's a lot of extra expenses, you know.
Yes.
Right. So
yes. Yeah. I always thought it was funny. People would ask me when I shot a lot of weddings, people would ask me, you know, like, oh, what equipment do you bring with? And I'm like, listen, I bring like $10,000 of equipment. You don't have to worry. I'm going to have my cell phone there for like pictures so I can post it on like, Instagram and stuff. But like, I've got a lot of I've invested into my business. So don't worry about what I'm bringing or not bringing.
Yeah. Because I mean, if you're starting with some of the technical stuff with anyone, they glaze over. It's just like,
oh yeah, yes.
A Mark III what now? And
right,
26 to
yep.
70 what? Huh? Yeah.
Yeah. I had a few people ask me like during a wedding consult, like, oh, what equipment do you use? And I was like, they're like, oh, my uncle blah 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 shows up with his camera to every event, and he's gonna want to know. And I'm like, okay, right, and like run through that list of like, well, I shoot on Canons and I've got 2 bodies, and here's this and there's that, and I've got L series lenses, and they're like, oh, okay, yeah, that'll be great.
That's probably something they got off a forum that they've got to ask you to make sure, right?
Yes. And back in the day, like back in the in 2010 to 2014, it was really popular for people to show up with like, I'm not kidding, like 2 or 3 pages of questions to ask me, right? Because they would go on Pinterest, and not that it's a bad thing, right? It's a good thing because it allows people to be informed. But it was one of these, like, I always thought it was hilarious. They would roll up with these like questionnaires for me, and I'm like, we really don't need this. So there was a point in time where like I had all of those questions answered on my website, and I would just, like we would meet and they would pull out the paper, and I'd be like, you know what? I have all this on my website. If you really want to go read it, that's fine. You're welcome to, but I would love to just understand what your day is going to look like before you start like interrogating me.
Oh, wow. Did you find that sort of hard to deal with? Because like, I mean, I guess with your own experience as being more of a shy person, the first time somebody rolled up with one of those, so here's all of my questions and I've got them printed out, like how did that feel?
Oh my gosh. Oh, that I probably went like tomato red in the face and was like, oh no, I can't answer all these. Like, I know there were a few wedding consults that I probably spent 2 or 3 hours with them at a coffee shop going through every single question that was on their sheet, because I was like, well, I don't want them to walk away wondering what if, right? But after a couple of those, I was like, okay, this is ridiculous. I can't do this. I have to like figure out a different way to like approach this subject. So when people would email me, asking if I had dates open and so forth, answer them back and say, if you have any questions, here's the FAQ page on my website. If you have any further questions, just make sure you bring them along or ask me here, and I'm happy to answer them. And that really helped people like calm down and not be like, I probably had 4 or 5 people bring like those like notebook full of questions. It was actually more moms that would come with, and they would ask a lot of those questions. And, so it was one of those like, okay, here are the things you can tell your mom or your dad or whoever is paying for your photographer to like help them understand how I'm going to run the day, essentially.
And I guess those are skills that you've taken into what you do with your coaching now, of that whole, finding the right people and knowing if they're the kind of person that shows up with the book of questions or not, right?
Yeah. So it's kind of funny because I feel like that whole process is kind of repeating itself now, right? So some of the people that like, not the same people, but like just similar things. And it happened in the yoga studio too, right? Where, because I feel like I'm still so new in the coaching world, right? I've been in the coaching world for about 3 years, but I had a baby in there, right? We had our second in September of 2021. So I took a 6-month kind of hiatus from doing anything and really just like focused on like our family. And then I was able to like come back and like, okay, how do I want this to look? Like, how do I want this business to be? So I feel like I've really only been full in on coaching for about a year, which has been awesome. But now I'm starting to see the people come in that like they have this whole notebook of questions where they're like, how long have you been coaching? And what have you been doing? And what are your specialties? And, this, that, and the other thing. And the other day I was like, okay, it's time for me to have like an FAQ page on my website that answers some of these like commonly asked questions. And like, for me, probably redoing some of the copy on my website to answer some of those questions before people are like even booking with me. And, I think that's all part of the process of like finding your ideal client and learning what your ideal client is going to ask or is wondering, or, the language that they speak or the words that they use, things that are going to like send those triggers in their brain to be like, oh yeah, I love what you say. I really connected on that post. Yes, you're the person for me to work with.
Yeah. Because I mean, like those people who go through all of and create all the questions, I mean, like they're the people who are very serious about to buy, and they're probably the people who take more action. Do you find that, like in terms of coaching or that kind of thing? Or
I would say it's kind of 50-50. I feel like they act, but also they're hesitant to act, right? They're like, well, if I'm going to put my money where my mouth is, and I'm going to hand over money, I want to make sure you're the best fit for me, which rightfully so, right? And I do the same thing. When I was looking for a new coach, I was like, okay, I really want to be sure that I understand what this coach is about and that I'm really in line with their values, and that I enjoy their free content, because if I enjoy their free content a lot, I probably enjoy their paid for content. And I feel the same way, right? And I've said that to different people who have hopped on discovery calls with me and kind of interrogated me, right? Asking me all this stuff. And then, when they're like, you've only been coaching for a year. And I'm like, well, I've been in business for 16 years. So, like I'm a business coach with I call it a chaos to clarity coach, because I basically help you figure out the foundations of your business, because I'm really good at being in that energy of that like beginner mindset. So yeah, I think everything is figure outable, and I'm here to help you figure that out. So I don't have like a one size fits all strategy, right? My strategy is to really approach people individually and say, okay, if you didn't have to worry about anything else, how would you want to run your business? And then explore like, well, why can't you step into that right now, right? Why isn't that available for you right now?
That's so powerful. I remember that energy. Like for me, I've had a number of pivots, and so then for a number of business beginnings, and just that, and learning those skills and becoming brave enough and confident enough to be like, oh, yes, this is what I want and I can do this, rather than, rethinking it and going, oh, maybe, this isn't the right thing, or maybe this isn't the right time. And yeah, so powerful. I love what you do for those people. So
yeah, it's so fun. And like I said, like I love being in that beginner energy, right? Like my husband, he was like, let's build a sauna and a cold plunge at our house, right? And I was like, oh, great. And my daughter, my 5-year-old, she was like, well, I want to help. And I said, well, go get your Legos and you can build a sauna, right? And so like watching her like understand what this thing is, because she had no clue what a sauna was 3 hours ago, right? So, so we had to kind of explain it to her, and like watching her like the wheels turn in her brain, and she was like, oh, okay, so I can build this, and here's this. And it was so fun to watch her. And I love that, like I said, everything is figure outable. Like she figured out how to make herself a sauna, right, with her little Legos, and like she's so proud of it. So, and I think that as adults we forget to play, right? So when you add that element of play back in, it kind of makes everything easier, and it makes it not so like, oh my gosh, I'm never going to be able to do this, right? Suddenly you're like, okay, let me just play a little bit. And what does my ideal day look like? What does my ideal business look like? How can I make money, right? Like how can I bring and attract, or whatever you want to say, but how can I bring that to me, and I get to choose what I want to charge, right? And like it just opens up so many more opportunities for people to really like dive in and really dream about like, oh, I get to choose my own destiny here.
Yeah, just as you were talking about that, actually, it just made me think about some of the stuff that you teach with the goddess mindset, the employee mindset, and I forget the third one as I'm doing this, so you can jump in and tell me the third. I'm always like that. I remember two of the
That's
three,
okay.
always.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
CEO mind. So CEO mindset,
Oh, right.
employee mindset, and goddess mindset. Yeah.
Yeah, some of like that kind of thing, plus your teaching background, I can see all of that coming into that interaction with your daughter
Yeah.
and helping beginners through that. So yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I really love, like, I think having those three mindsets within my business, right? Those are really like I guess they're the pillars of my business, right? And I spend time in my like CEO mode, or like thinking about my business, dreaming and like doing things a CEO would do, or at least my CEO, right? Like I have taken time to meditate, write down, think about whatever that thing is for you, right? For me, I like to meditate and just like get really quiet and like think about, okay, if I am stepping into a CEO role, what does that look like? What do I do as a CEO? How do I embody that? And same thing for employee, same thing for goddess. And I think one of the things when you step into being an entrepreneur, one of the things people forget is the self-care, or they let self-care be this like unattainable thing of like, oh, I have to go get a manicure and pedicure every week, and I have to get a massage, and I have to do this, and it has to be like a big to do, and it doesn't, right? Like it can be that, absolutely. Like don't discount that, but also like where can you find those pockets of goddess time during the day, right? Like getting up from your computer and walking away from it for lunch, right? Standing outside for 5 or 10 minutes to like reset the body, right? And that's where a lot of the yoga comes in from my background, is like, okay, how can you take like 5-minute breaks to move the stagnant energy, especially when you're hitting your head against the computer because you've been doing this same thing for the last 3 hours and nothing is working, right? Like, how can you get up, move your body, move the energy, get your brain off of what you're doing and onto something else, so that you have the space for those like aha moments, the downloads of like, I know exactly how to figure Canva out, or I know exactly how to post that podcast, or I know that it's got to be here, right? So, opening up yourself for some of those different mindset opportunities is so huge in like building the foundations of your business, but also scaling your business, right? Like, this isn't the mindsets that I teach are not things that only beginners need. They're really across the board. Everyone can adopt these into their business.
Yeah, I remember for me, like just learning, like you talk about it in terms of the goddess mindset and then creating that time for the downloads. But for me, it was the way I learned it was about just, just taking breaks, and that actually taking a break can be a measure of like, can be productive as well. Because again, that's like where the ideas can come from, and you need that space. And yeah, that's something I know I wish I had learned so many years earlier. It's sort of something I've learned in the last couple of years. Yeah, more so in the last 12 months, but yeah, definitely in the last couple of years. So yeah, so much power in that. Just, oh man, sorry, I love your stuff. So.
Yeah, no, and I think it's really important because a lot of people, I've taught yoga for 10 years. Wow. Yeah, I've taught 10 years worth of yoga, which seems crazy to me that I've taught yoga for that long. But one thing that I really that really impacted me in the beginning of my yoga journey was that like this is a way for me to care for my body and for me to like care for my mind as well, right? Like I could be moving, and my first yoga teacher always called yoga a moving meditation, right? And you get into, and granted, I learned power yoga first, which if you know anything about yoga, power yoga is like crazy hot, sweaty. Like I had no clue what I was walking into. And the first yoga class that I took it was crazy. I remember like getting there, sitting down on the mat, and I'm like, what is this, stretching? And the teacher kind of giggled and she was like, oh yeah, you could call it stretching, right? And like 60 minutes later, I'm like a puddle of sweat. And I was like, that's not what I thought stretching was. But I felt so good, right? Like I felt so good that I was like, I gotta come back, because there's like something here that like I'm meant to like take forward. And I didn't really know like what that was. And I kept showing up, I kept coming back, and I kept like understanding more about my body and understanding more about like how I think, how I process thoughts, and how I like how I was thinking, how I was like talking to myself, my inner dialogue, right? And that's also something I talk about on like goddess days or goddess mindset, is like how you talk about yourself or talk to yourself, like that matters. And like if you're always telling yourself, oh man, you did that dumb thing again, or blah, 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 right? That feels really heavy. But, you know, if you approach it as like, okay, this isn't working, let's do something to change how I'm doing this thing, right? Whatever that thing is. How can I reapproach that thing so it doesn't feel so hard, or so it doesn't feel so impossible, right? Like that's part of your goddess mindset. Even though you're bringing in employee and CEO mindset into there, like the kindness and like that loving kindness is really a way for you to like kind of like build yourself up, right? Like, and hold yourself in a more powerful and brave way, right? Because you're taking that chance to be like, okay, I'm here for me, and I am here to support myself, and I am my number one fan. Like that is very powerful in business.
Yeah, it is actually. I am my number one fan. It's oh man, that's something I'm still working on. Like it's so powerful, and yet you'd think it like it should come naturally to us as people, right? Like, you
Mm-hmm.
know, the whole, you know, main character in our own stories, but yeah, it just does not. I mean, at least to my experience, like yeah.
Right. Well, and our like we as humans we're wired to like run away from, you know, like the saber-toothed tiger, right? If you think back to the caveman days, right? Like we are meant to like run away, fight or flight, right? We're meant to run away from danger. And some of the things we see as danger, right? Like stepping into business with the unknown, that's quote unquote dangerous, because you're not sure what's around the next corner, right? You're never really sure what you're going to encounter. So your brain just automatically thinks, oh, this is dangerous, I'm keeping you safe, right? Like that's like a subconscious thought of like you're not safe. And I've had anxiety for years, and a lot of my anxieties are like, I don't feel safe. So when I started doing things that I'm like, okay, what makes me feel safe? What makes me feel secure? What makes me feel stable, right? Those are some of my core values. And like, so understanding core values was a piece of that. And then also like acting on that, right? Like if I feel anxious and nervous throughout the day, I will stop and, you know, just kind of like check in with myself and say, okay, let's have a piece of chocolate and let's go outside, right? Like I'm gonna go outside, take a couple deep breaths, enjoy a piece of chocolate, and just like check in with myself. Like, what do I need right now? Do I need to keep sitting at the computer, batting my head against whatever I'm doing? Or is my time going to be better spent doing something else? And maybe that's the laundry, the dishes, right? Or even laying down, right? Like going and taking a nap and just like being okay with whatever that is.
Yeah, wow. And then is the process of that, does that help you connect with that feeling of safety again? Is that how that works for you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's it, kind of like I know. So the other day I just wasn't getting anything done, right? And I knew it. And like every 10 seconds I was picking up my phone and I was scrolling here and I was getting mad and I was like anxious and angry. And I'm like, okay, stop, turn off the computer, put down the phone, walk away, and like go have a piece of chocolate, go walk, right? Go walk to the mailbox and back and just like disconnect for a little bit, And then like as I stepped away from my computer, like this voice in my head was like, it would be really nice to lay down, even if it's for 20 minutes, right? And I was like, oh, okay, cool. Yeah, let's lay down. Like, yeah, it's the middle of the day. What else do I have to do? Right? Like, and I caught myself being like, are you really gonna lay down? And I thought, yes, I am really gonna lay down, right? So it's kind of this inner dialogue in my head of like almost good cop, bad cop kind of a thing where it's like, are you really gonna do that thing? You have this whole laundry list of things to do. Whereas like my goddess self is like, yeah, let's just lay down, or let's go for a walk, right? Like a longer walk, or like go down to the coffee shop by the corner and go like get a sandwich, right? Or just something that's like, especially if I'm feeling really frazzled in whatever I'm doing, right? So that kind of helps shift the energy of like stuck and angry and anxious and like nothing's ever going to get done and I'm not good enough and all of those limiting beliefs, right? That again, at any level of business pop back up, right? Like I was just telling my coach last week and I'm like, I've got money drama, like money, like, is anyone ever going to book with me this month? Drama going on in my head. And I'm like, I thought I worked through this. And, and she's like, well, it's a practice, right? So, they call yoga a practice for a reason because there's always somewhere else to go in the class. There's always some other like level you can get to. And it's not necessarily about like getting to the next level. It's more of like, how are you showing up today for yourself? And, how are you speaking to yourself? And how do you, when you come up to a problem, like, how do you approach that problem? Do you approach it like, oh my God, this is happening again. I can't believe it. This is crap. I'm never going to blah, blah, blah. Or do you approach it and say, okay, this is happening again. This kind of happened before. I need to do something different, right? I need to reapproach how I'm doing it, right? And if you need an example, like I just had this example with my email list. So I just switched CRMs a couple months ago and I updated some of the behind the scenes stuff. So I had a new email that I was using to send out for newsletter stuff. And every newsletter I was sending out was going into spam, right? So everything was saying it was 100% delivered. And I was like, yeah, awesome. And then I'm like, there's a 0% open rate. What is going on? Right. So I contacted the company and they're like, well, since you have a new email, right? Google or whatever the internet gods are, right? They're like, they see that email as a threat because there's not a lot of traffic, right? Mm-hmm. So they were like, just start sending and receiving emails from that email. And I was like, oh, one more thing to do. And then I'm like, no. I get to do that and I can. It's not hard for me to send and receive emails from that email, right? So I contacted a couple friends. I was like, hey, I'm going to send you a couple emails from this new email. I just need you to reply back a couple times, right? Like let's have a text conversation basically over email to help the algorithm that is the internet, right? Like boost that email so that when I send out mass emails, it doesn't go into spam, right? So working through that problem, right? Like I had to talk to myself a little bit nicer to say, okay, yes, you can figure this out, right? Like being my own cheerleader, being my own biggest fan and saying, contact support. They are there for a reason, right? You can do this. This is not hard. They probably have seen this before. You are not the only person in the world having this problem, right? And, like, yes, it's a big deal, but also like it doesn't have to be that big of a deal, right? Like I don't have to let it hold me back from moving forward. And within a few days, I was able to like shift that, right? Like that aspect of my business to be like, okay, now it's a little bit easier. People are starting to see my emails and I'm starting to see the open rates now. So, like, again, taking that time to like be kind to myself, right? Like be kind, rewind was something we said a lot in the 90s around here, right? Like I'm like, okay, just take a step back and like, you know exactly what you need to do to get to the next step forward.
That's a really interesting story, actually. I've been in online marketing for 10 years now and done a lot of email marketing. I've never seen zero open rates on a new email address like that. So yeah, well done on being brave and not freaking out.
I mean, there was
yeah.
there was definitely a lot of freaking out to the point where I was like, what did I just do to my business? Did I really just tank this whole thing? Right? Like in my mind, I was like, oh yeah, you totally like your business is done. It's done for.
No
Done.
one's ever
Never
gonna buy
again.
from you now.
No one's ever, right? No one's, and then I'm like, my husband's like, I am pretty sure there's probably a setting you can change or just contact support, right? Like it took him being like telling me like 4 or 5 times, just contact support, you know? And then I'm sitting here and I'm like, he's probably right. You know what? I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to contact support and see what they say, right? Like, and it's going to be okay.
Oh, yeah. The amount of let's just contact support, see if they can fix this. Yeah, I get it. So many times. Especially for me, like earlier on in the internet when like things just were not quite as easy as they are now, like, you know, all these systems and yeah. Oh, wow. Okay. So tell me a little bit about like your future plans. Like what brave things do you have kind of planned for the next 3 to 6 months? I don't know how much of a planner you are or yeah, but what comes
so
up?
I used to not plan anything and just fly by the seat of my pants. And I have learned that going in with a general outline of a plan is probably best for me, right? And I don't plan everything to a T, but I have brave things that I am doing, continuing to grow my podcast and letting that be more of the forefront of my business is something that I'm really going to hone in on for the next 3 to 6, probably 12 months. And also opening up some different offers within my coaching business. I just opened up a 30-day, I guess it's kind of a mini brand refresh, if you will. So like going in and really understanding and helping people understand their offers. So this 30-day like mini refresh is probably for more coaches and like thought leaders, creators, people like that, people who have, although photographers could hop in there too, right? You know, really for anyone who has an offer and they're just feeling like it's not converting the way they want it to. So maybe it's slow or stagnant, or maybe they have too many orders and they're not making enough money, right? Like that kind of thing. So really understanding their offer, what their ideal client wants, understanding their core values, and then building a strategy with them and for them. So like a specific, like here are 1 to 3 things you can do every day that will get you to where you want to be in 90 days. So I just opened that up. And then I opened more one-on-one coaching spots up. I'm hoping to dive into the group coaching world, I think, maybe later this year. I keep saying next month. And I don't feel like I'm quite there yet. And like a lot of things in my previous businesses, I have really honed in on my, like, I do a lot of decision making with my gut. And like, if my gut is like, yes, do this, or no, don't, or wait, like I've learned to listen to that and really start to hone in on like, okay, I'm going to wait on that and do this other thing first. So those are probably the brave things that I'm stepping into, is really, you know, honing in on the mini offer and then bringing people on for one-on-one coaching and dreaming up a group coaching program.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was just having a conversation about this with a client just the other day. Is that whole when to do a group program and when not. And like when you say I'm not quite there yet, like what is it for you that would help you be there or be brave enough to do that, even if you don't mind me asking?
Because it's not something that I really thought too much on, other than the fact that like my gut just kind of says wait, and like now is not the right time, right? So, you know, I guess how will I know I'm there? For me, it's really a gut feeling. And I resisted like leaning into that gut feeling for a long time, probably up until about 3 or 4 years ago. And then I was like, man, all the things that have gone like quote unquote wrong, there has been this like pit of my stomach falling out, like gut sensation of like just dread, right? Like anytime I made a decision that was like wrong or like didn't work out the way I wanted it to. I'm like, what happens if I lean into that and think about like, okay, what does it feel like when my gut says yes, right? Like, so honing in on those feelings. So I'm not really sure what I'm like waiting for as far as a group program goes, other than that, you know, maybe I guess there's a few things I want to fall into place. Like I want my podcast to be more like well-known, I guess, right? Like more people listening to it, and it's gaining attraction, right? Like, so people are listening to it, and, you know, so that's gaining momentum. And I've started offering some monthly master classes in my Facebook group. So I guess those two things, right? I want a few more master classes under my belt where I've got, I guess, kind of the feel of a Zoom room, right? Where I'm the one in control, right? Because I've been in the Zoom room as like a student, and now I want to make sure that I have, I guess, proper control over the people that are coming in, right? Or that I can hold an audience. Because that was something during the pandemic with the yoga studio. I switched everything to virtual. So I was in Bali when the world shut down, right? And I came home. And within a week of coming home, I had everything online. So I had everything from in the studio to online and like offering classes and like back to rolling. And the one thing I didn't like about teaching Zoom yoga was that nobody had their camera on. So I couldn't gauge participation, right? Like I knew the people were there, but it was kind of like I was just teaching out into space with like, I wasn't sure if they were like paying attention to me, right? Because they also didn't really like interact with me, right? So their speakers were not, they were muted, and which is fine, but like, is anyone even there? Right? There were times where I was like, I feel like I want to just say Bueller, right? Like, is anyone listening to me? I don't know. So, like understanding feedback, I think is probably what I'm like waiting for, maybe. Yeah. I don't have a solid answer for that.
Yeah. I get that. I just, was curious about that kind of thing. I mean, like, I know for me in this online space, like I've taught some group stuff and everything, and I too have a background. I've done some teaching in classrooms and things like that too, but in the online space, I've had some people who like they didn't want to turn their camera on, and for me, like I need that feedback. Like I need to see their face to see if they're getting it. Because if I can see their face, then I know I need to explain this more. And so then I was on like a webinar, and I'd just be like stopping and checking in and going, so, Allison, I don't remember what her name was, Allison. So yeah, just let me know if you have any questions on that, or, just always checking in. And then she ended up just kind of going, oh, look, I'll just turn my camera on for you. Because they like, I mean, I get it, people like they it's easier to keep their camera off, but just for us as teachers, and to be able to see if we're explaining and connecting, and
right, for sure. I think it's definitely that connection of like, I want to know that you're understanding what I'm saying, because otherwise I get into this loop of saying, does that make sense? Do you understand? Are you hearing what I'm saying? Right? Where I start sounding like a mom talking to her 5-year-old, right? Are you listening to me? Do you understand what I'm saying? Can you say that back to me? Right? Like, what did I just tell you?
I didn't think about it like that, but gosh, that's probably how I came across too.
Well, and it's not like it's not a bad, I don't think it's a bad thing, because like as a teacher, right, you want that feedback. You want that like, do you understand? Because if you don't, I can show you, right? Like, because we're either like auditory, visual, or like sensory, right? Like, so if one of those isn't working, right? Like I want to make sure that I can switch how I'm speaking, or show you something different to say, here, this is XYZ, right? Like, this is how you accomplish that thing. So I think like that's what it is for me, I'm sure, is that like I want that feedback so that I know that, number one, that you're paying attention, so that next week when we're on the call, I'm not going to have to explain the same thing, right, again. Or if I do have to explain that, then I know that like, okay, I'm going to make you a Loom or a short Zoom recording, and I'm going to give that to you so that you have that thing so that I can stop repeating myself, because I don't like to repeat myself.
I get that. Okay, so what would you say to a listener who's about to do their next brave thing, but they're hesitating and holding back? Ooh. Or maybe they're thinking it's not the right time, kind of like what you were just thinking about with your group coaching.
So if you're hesitating and wondering if it's the right time, I would definitely do a body check, right? Like, check in with yourself and get quiet, right? Like, take some time, either the very beginning of a day or the end of the day. I love being up at like 5:30 in the morning so that the house is quiet, the coffee can brew, and I can just exist in a quiet house, right? Like, it's just me awake, and like all of the thoughts can like percolate, right, for the day. Also at the end of the day, right, those few moments before I go to bed is just like, okay, did I meet my needs today, right? Like, so check in with yourself, right? Like, is it the quote unquote wrong time or not the right time because you're scared that it's gonna fail? Or is it not the right time because, like, I don't know, some other circumstance is happening, right? Because usually the hesitation is like, oh, I don't know what's around the other corner. But what if what's around the other corner is really amazing, right? Like, you're never going to know until you try. So start, right? The hardest part of being an entrepreneur is starting and taking those first steps and building those foundational things and like learning and getting used to all the things, just like walking, right? Like, nobody ever like stood up and never fell down again, right? Like, every baby always has fallen, right? Even if they stood up, took a bunch of steps, they still fell down, right? Like, so yeah, things are not gonna work the way you thought they were. You're gonna have to do things differently. Not everything is gonna work out. You're gonna pivot, and that's all like part of the game. I guess that's part of where that childlike wonder and that play can come in really handy, right? Because, oh, what happens if it doesn't work? But what happens if it does work? What happens if it turns out more amazing than you thought it was going to be?
Yes. Oh man. Yes. What happens if it does work? And when that thing of it might not work, oh, I probably shouldn't do it. It can be so hard to even imagine, oh, it could work. It's like, no.
Right. And even if you're still having those feelings of like, oh, what if it does work? And then getting really scared of that, right? Because like, you're scared of it not working, and you're also probably scared of it working, right? At least for me, I have both of those thoughts. And like with the podcast, I thought, oh, what if it doesn't work? Maybe I shouldn't do it. And then I also thought, because I'm like forever an optimist, like, people close to me are like, how are you're like glass totally full all of the time. And like, or mostly full all of the time. There's not a lot of things that I'm like, oh yeah, no, I don't think so, right? It's more of like, what if this does work? This is going to be cool. I'm going to try this. And even if it doesn't work out this way, there's still something really cool that's going to come, right? Like, so looking at it again from that play and wonder of like, ooh, what is the cool things that are going to happen? Don't get me wrong, because I still get scared of like, oh, okay, maybe if I do this, we'll say a group program, for example, what if 100 people sign up for it? What if 100 people sign up for my group program? How am I going to teach that many people? Right? And right. So I get in these like extremes of like, no one's going to sign up, or like 100 people or 1,000 or 1,000,000, right? Like, everyone in the world is going to sign up and I'm not going to be able to like serve them, right? And I'm like, okay, bring it back down, right? Like, okay, what if one person signs up? What if 5 people sign up, right? Like, what if 100 people sign up? So, like exploring those things from that wonder to say, okay, I'm going to get really excited about this Because usually when you get excited about things, that makes it a lot easier to work on it too, right? And it makes it easier to like cross things off the list because you're like, oh, okay, I'm going to get this done. People are going to start joining. I get to talk about this. I'm really excited. People are going to wonder why I'm acting like an Energizer bunny talking about these things, right? So like being excited and in that is really a great way to attract people to what you're doing, and also helps you kind of build the plane while it's in the air, right? Like, so even though I think a group program is probably in December, right? Like after this conversation, who knows, maybe it'll be July when it happens, right? Like it's one of those things where I'm like, okay, I'm not sure what I'm waiting for, but something is going to click, and I have faith in the universe, in God, spirit, whatever that is for whatever. And like, I have faith that like it is coming, and I just have to be open to the possibility of it showing up.
Oh, wow. I love that. And I love how also like just how connected you are to that, I'll know when the moment is right and things like that. Yeah.
It wasn't super easy to get to this place, right? Like I've always kind of had that knowing of like, I'll know when I get there, and it's okay if I'm not totally like, if I don't totally know the plan. I do really like to know the plan, but I'm okay if I don't know like exact details. But it definitely took me a while to be like sure of myself, where now I'm like, okay, I've got this and I understand what I'm doing, and let's see what happens, right? Like being in that kind of energy probably hasn't, like, I would say within the last year and a half is when that kind of showed up and started, like, I started really leaning into that energy more of like, you know what, I'm just going to take the bull by the horns and I'm just going to go forward. I'm going to move. I'm going to start talking about all of these things that I have ideas about, and like they've all kind of like merged into this really cool like coaching world that I've kind of created, right? And like all of these like pieces are like coming at just the right moments, and I'm always like, wow, this is amazing. I can't believe I'm so excited this is happening for me, and I'm amazed, and I'm a little scared, but it's like excited scared, so like I'm here for this ride.
Yeah, actually, as you talk about that, definitely I've been going through similar, like I don't feel it on the like gut level, but feeling it on this knowing and just things arriving at the right time. And it's
Yeah.
like, just because for me, like I've been trying to, do things online for years, like my own things online, not just helping other people. And yeah, it's just like it seemed like I was pushing against something, pushing a boulder uphill. But now things just seem to be coming up, and it's like, you're ready for this now. And it's just like, yeah, it's awesome, but also scary. I so get
right.
yeah. Thank you so much for all of your time today. I really appreciate being able to talk to you like this and dive into bravery stuff. I know that there's a ton of stuff that's going to help your potential clients listening to this, my people who are, doing brave things and all that kind of stuff. So thank you so much. And
Yeah.
could you let us know where people can find you so that they can connect more? And
Yeah, for sure. So I am very active on my Instagram stories and Instagram in general. So you can find me at Maggie Lynn, Lynn Coaching. And I think if you type that into Facebook, my Facebook page should pop up. I'm pretty sure. I'm also on Facebook, Maggie Lynn Olson with an O. So let's be friends. And you can find my Chaos to Clarity podcast on most platforms: Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, Pandora. There's probably a couple others that I don't remember, but just type in Chaos to Clarity and I should pop up. And yeah, I would love that. I would love to connect on Instagram. That's probably where I spend the majority of my time. So let's be friends.
okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Is there anything else you wanted to say before we finish up? Or?
I would say, you know what? You can do anything that you put your mind to. So like put on your brave badge and go out and do brave things. Go get everything that you're dreaming of.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the Business Bravery podcast. Has this episode inspired you to do something brave? Even if it's only send a difficult email, please share it with me on Instagram or other social media channels. Feel free to tag me at Tiffany G Studios. That's TIFFANY. G for golf, STUDIOS, no spaces, no underscores, etc. Or you can use the hashtag Business Bravery Podcast so that I can cheer you on and together we can inspire other coaches and course creators to do brave things in their business and life. Now, I'm Tiffany and I'll leave you with this one last thing. What's one brave thing you're going to do today? It doesn't have to be big. Even the smallest steps can create the most massive results. So again, feel free to share it with me either publicly or privately so that I can cheer you on. That's it from me. Until next time, bye for now.